2007. South Africa is the largest producer and usually a net exporter of maize, but the shortfall will have to be imported. White maize is a staple for many South Africans, while yellow maize is mainly used for animal feed in the poultry and meat industries. Already prices have moved up sharply, causing concern about higher food prices and inflation. Well, to discuss, we're now joined by Grain SA economist Wandile Sihlobo. He's with us from our Pretoria studio. Good evening to you, Wandile. In some parts of South Africa, drought conditions have lasted for about 3 years. We're now seeing contraction, negative growth in the agricultural sector. Just put this in perspective. What is the scale of what we're seeing right now?
The drought has actually affected us negatively in a larger extent. I mean, if you look at our crop from what we're going to be harvesting this year and comparing from what we harvested last year, it's decreased about 32%. So that's a huge decrease. And I mean, the larger part that has been affected, like you said, is a Northwest province, which produces a larger part of the white maize, as well as the Free State and just generally the country. And for some time now, we're going to start to see South Africa being on a net importer of maize. So we are really facing on in a difficult situation. And I think for the farming community, it's a difficult situation, and for the consumers, that's where I think the impact is also going to be in a bit of a really difficult side.
Well, let's start with the farming community. Is it already being felt? We are hearing of farmers with animals who are selling those animals because the price of feeding them is becoming too high.
Yes, maize is an input for the chicken industry, on the livestock industry. And the prices now, if you look, for example, in the prices of white maize, you see that on year-to-year basis, they already increased by around about 60%. So the guys on the livestock are feeling much of the impact, and the guys on the chicken industry are feeling much of impact. And consequently, all of that is going to be transferred to the consumer. So we are sitting on in a difficult position. And just on the farmers as well as the grain producers, they also sitting on in a difficult situation, because now people are looking on the next season on what they're going to be doing, and financially farmers are in debt. And at the moment, we don't have the exact number right in the roundup, but we know that a lot of farmers, grain farmers, livestock farmers are sitting on in a difficult position. So it is a bit of a difficult for agriculture.
So some of them are looking at fields. The harvest hasn't come yet, but they probably know not much is going to happen. Can they last for a year, or will we see lots of farmers have to leave?
What is happening right now, the guys are already harvested almost around about 52% of what is expected, because just generally South Africa expects to receive around about 9.76 million tons of maize. And what has been delivered already on the silos is around about 52% of that. And if you speak to the guys on some of the farming communities, say, how many hectares have you lost? People have lost around about 60% of what they usually harvest on a normal season. Some have lost about 40%. There is a variation, but the impact is there, and it is a difficult situation.
Wandile, the Agricultural Business Chamber says it wants to meet government, look at subsidies, things like that. These farmers also finding it difficult to go to the banks that now have new laws and have to be careful about reckless lending. Is there any intervention here?
There is a communication that is actually happening in there, and the business side as well as the primary agricultural side for us, there is a conversation that is happening in there. The banking associations, they are aware of the impact that is on agriculture. So there are some ongoing discussions that are in there looking on and what can we possibly do in the next season. Because you know that even if you look now on a weather outlook, there are possibilities of El Nino next year, which is we might receive rainfalls that are below normal. So there are those risks, and we are communicating, and there is some ongoing work in there. But I think what is actually now at the moment is going to be on a difficult side is on the consumer side. Because if you look at the maize prices, you realize that the prices, like I said, they have increased by 60%. White maize, for example, the September contract price month has increased by around about 70%. And all of that impact is going to be transferred to the consumer. And the poor side of our population are the ones that are going to be feeling the impact a lot. Because you know that a lot of people are consuming a lot of maize maize meal foods are consuming a lot of SAMP. So all of that impact is going to be transferred to them. Because if you look on a protein, on the chicken and a beef and all of that, the impact is not as fast to filter through as it is on the maize meal side. So the farming community is facing a difficult time, but the consumers will start to feel that impact as well. So it's not looking so well. And given also what you have just said now about fuel, you realize that about 80% of our grain gets to be transported via road. So given these increases in the petrol prices and the diesel prices, and then they start to filter through, so the impact is going to be really much larger. And I mean, if we talk about 70% increase on a maize price, about half of that, which would be 35%, gets to be directed straight to the consumers for food stuff like maize meal and SAMP, even though for chicken and the bread and the high processed food, it gets to filter through on some of the other impacts. So on a consumer side, we're facing one in a bit of a difficult side. And for the farming community, I think people are starting to think on what they can possibly do on a coming season. Because this season, we already felt the impact and we see that it's not looking so well.
Wandile, very quickly, please, 35% increase, that is a whopper. What are the other effects? If you go to the stores and you want to buy meat and poultry in coming months, for instance, and when will we feel the full force of this drought on food prices?
What happened, Francia, is this: you have your grain food stuff, and which is maize meal and your SAMP, and you have your eggs, your chicken, and your beef. So what happens is there is a lag when the prices go up and when it reflects maybe on your retail stores. So for the maize meal and the SAMP, usually around about 3 months or so to start to filter through and then appear on the retail shelves. And then for the high processed food stuff, as well as the high protein food stuff like the eggs and the beef, you start now to see it after maybe a 6 month. But I mean, for right now, you remember that the prices started to increase as early as around about May, April. So some of that impact has started to filter through on a maize meal. But now we're looking on in a ton, like for example, today, the ton was above 3,000 of a white maize. So you start to see that really being apparent now in the next two coming months. And then when you look towards the end of the year, that's where you'll see the eggs prices going up, the chicken prices going up. And I think one of the other important things that you have to know when you're looking at the CPI, which is inflation, you realize that about 14% of that is really comprised of the grain related food stuff. So any major impact that happens on a grain, it directly translates now on an inflation side, and it affects the larger part of the country. So we are concerned on that. But one thing to emphasize is the fact that we're not yet in a crisis.
All right, we'll keep track and follow it with you. Hope to chat to you in future. Thank you so much for your time, Wandile Sihlobo from Grain SA, painting a worrying picture for farmers and South African consumers. Of course, inflation a worry, and we already know the Reserve Bank expected to raise interest rates later this year to control inflation. Now,